So last Sunday we were talking about new atheists. Okay, that's what we spent most of our discussion on. And basically I said, well, who are the new atheists? I broke that down, the two words. So atheist, an atheist is someone who denies the existence of God. Okay, so someone committed to the proposition God does not exist. Remember, I told you, an atheist is not the same as an agnostic who says, well, I don't know if God exists or not. Atheists are committed to saying God does not exist, and they have to defend that, okay? But we know atheists have existed for a very long time. So the reason why these people are called the new atheists is because they surged to prominence relatively recently, specifically as a response to the 9/11 attacks, right, done in the name of religion. They seized this opportunity and they made their claim to fame, basically, by how they criticize religion. We said that the new atheists, a characteristic, a defining one, is that they are hostile. What I mean by this is, right, and I'm sure we've encountered atheists who, right, don't believe God exists, but they're amicable, right, and friendly towards religious people because they understand that people can just disagree on these sorts of things. The new atheists tend to be hostile because they see religion as irrational and even dangerous, okay? So the new atheists, we said that throughout the book, we're going to be responding to specifically 4 new atheists because they are representatives of the movement, and they're called the 4 horsemen, okay? So Dennett, Hawkins, Hitchens, and Harris, Sam Harris, okay? And in chapter 2 of the book, we looked at a bunch of objections that they had. But I think our favorite one was the Dawkins quote. So I'll go ahead and read it just so that we can laugh a little. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, a misogynist, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. We have to give him props, right? He definitely took time to think about this paragraph. So props for that. But basically we said after looking at all like a general overview of the objections, what we have are, the charges are as follows: the Canaanite genocide, the binding of Isaac, a jealous, egocentric deity, racism, chattel slavery, women as inferior to men, harsh laws in Israel, the Mosaic law as perfect and permanently binding for all nations, and the irrelevance of God for morality. So remember, we said that we're going to be using their objections as springboards for our discussion. So the topic I want to focus on today is their charge of the irrelevance of God for morality. Okay, so let's start with their objections. Hitchens. What does Hitchens say? He says, I defy you or anyone to name one more deed that I would not do unless I became a Christian. Harris writes of, quote, the myth of secular moral chaos, by which he means that morality and social order don't need God or religion as their basis. His proof? There are plenty of moral atheists and many irreligious believers. Also, he rejects the notion that rape and killing children is wrong just because God says so. What about Dennett? Dennett says, quote, there is no reason at all why a disbelief in the immateriality of the soul should make a person less caring, less moral, less committed to the well-being of everybody on earth than somebody who believes in the Spirit. Indeed, those calling themselves spiritual can be cruel, arrogant, self-centered, and utterly unconcerned about the moral problems of the world. And what does Dawkins say? In his BBC anti-religious documentary, The Root of All Evil, he insists that kindness, generosity, and goodness can be found in human nature because we have altruistic genes. We're genetically wired, you see, to scratch one another's back. In other words, we can explain via evolution why we feel moral obligations without reference to God. And if you put all of these objections together, I think you're left with two questions that we need to answer, which are the two questions that I asked you guys last Sunday. Can you be good without believing in God? And the second one is, can you be good without God? Okay, so I'll repeat it. The first one is, can you be good without believing in God? And the second one is, can you be good without God? The claim that I'll be defending today is that if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Okay, so my answer to the second question, can you be good without God, is no. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. And we're going to spend the next two classes just on this, okay? So you guys know that I like to start off with definitions and distinctions because then they'll help us think clearly. The other day I was talking with someone who was debating another person about abortion, and he was telling me about how it went and that it didn't go so well, not because his arguments were bad, but just the other person, they weren't seeing eye to eye. And I was like, did you start off by defining what abortion was? And no, right, that's a mistake, because if you're not working with the same definitions, then you're just gonna talk past each other, okay? So let's break this claim down basically. Moral values versus moral duties, okay? When we speak about values, we are dealing with whether something is good or bad. It has to do with something's worth, okay? Let me give you positive examples of moral values. That would be things such as goodness, justice, mercy, compassion, tolerance. Those are good moral values. How about the negative side of things? Greed, selfishness, hatred, etc. Okay? Moral duties. Moral duties deal with whether something is right or wrong, what I ought or ought not do. Okay? So just think of, right, the 10 commandments, you shall do this, or you shall not do this, or you must do this, or you can't do this. You're prohibited from doing this. What's the difference? Okay? There are two reasons why I think these are conceptually different, values and duties. So the first is, just because something is good for me, so just because it is good for me to do something, that does not mean I am morally obligated to do it. Let me give you guys a couple of examples. Let's start with something silly. It is good for me to take vitamin C every day. Does that mean I have a moral obligation to take vitamin C every day? Does that mean, let me put it differently, that I'm an immoral person or I'm acting in a way that is not correct if I don't take vitamin C every day? I hope not, right? Because then I would, because I don't take vitamin C every day. Okay, let's go on to the next example. It is a good thing to become a lawyer, but that doesn't imply that it is therefore my duty to become a lawyer. For it is also good for me to become a firefighter and to become a doctor, but I can't be all of them at once. Okay, let me give you guys another example. It's a good thing to donate to charity. Here we're talking about moral values. It's a good thing to donate to charity. But I'm not always morally obligated to donate to every charity that I encounter, right? So you see how something can be a moral good, but that doesn't mean that I have a moral obligation to do it, okay? Let's go with, I guess, a little more controversial one. Peace is a moral good, right? We all like peace. Okay, that's a good moral thing. But that doesn't mean we're obligated to maintain peace at any cost. Most people would agree with this, right? Most people recognize that war is not necessarily evil, since some wars may be justified responses to aggression. So I can agree, right, with the pacifist, let's say, that war is bad, okay? War is bad because we want peace. Peace is what's good. We don't want a generation of young men dying and all of the things that result from war. But that doesn't mean that war is wrong, right? Peace is good, but that doesn't mean then that we are immoral if we go to war, okay, for justified reasons, okay? The second reason why I think moral values and duties are not the same thing is because occasionally we're going to be confronted with circumstances in which I am tragically confronted with nothing but bad choices, okay? It is not therefore wrong of me to choose one, since I must choose. Let me give you guys an example from literature. A movie was also made on this novel. It's called Sophie's Choice, okay? There's a mother and there's a Nazi officer, and tells her, you got to choose one of your children. Which one of your children is going to get sent into the gas chamber? If you don't choose, I'm going to kill them both. She has nothing but bad choices. But is she wrong if she chooses one of the children? The guy's going to kill both of them anyways, okay? Let me give you guys another example. This one you're probably familiar with, the trolley problem, right? You're in a train or whatever, and if it stays the same, the train will kill 5 people. But if you pull a little lever, it'll go and it'll kill 1 person, okay? Right now, you're confronted with nothing but bad choices, but does that mean that it's wrong for you to choose one? I don't think so, right? Or let me give you another example. Imagine being a doctor and you have 2 critically injured patients. They're both going to die. To make it even harder choice, they're both the same age and they both have the same health. So you can't say, oh, there's an old one and a young one. No, exactly the same, okay, health-wise and age. Is it wrong for you to choose to save one and you only have one treatment? It's better for you to let them both die because you don't want to choose? Right? So, moral values versus moral duties. I think we have established a conceptual distinction. Values deal with something's worth, whether it is good or bad. Duties deal with right or wrong. Are you obligated to do something or not? Any questions on moral values versus moral duties? Okay. All right. Let's go into another thing I've mentioned here, and it's the objective. Okay. Let's talk about the distinction between objective versus subjective. Okay. To say that something is objective, broadly speaking, is to say that something is independent of what people think, feel, or perceive. To say, in contrast, that something is subjective is to say that it is dependent on what human persons think, experience, or perceive. Okay? Let me give you guys a couple of examples. Okay, so the distinction between being on Mars and not being on Mars is an objective distinction. Whether there is a rock that is on Mars or not is in no way dependent upon your beliefs, right? Aaron might think that the rock is not on Mars, but if the rock is on Mars, it doesn't matter what Aaron believes because the rock is on Mars. Okay? By contrast, the distinction between here and there is not objective. Okay? Whether a particular event at a certain spatial location occurs here or occurs there depends upon a person's point of view. Let me give you a practical example of this, right? The other day, I was speaking with a client, and he was like, oh, I want the screen door on the left. And I was like, on your left or on the left of the workers who are installing, right? Because that's different. And he says, no, when I'm looking outside of the sliding glass door, I want it on my left. Okay, so if I'm installing it, it would be on the right. Okay, so that is subjective to where the person is located. Okay. Now, let's apply that to objective moral values and duties. We spoke about objective versus subjective broadly. Let's apply that to moral values and duties. To say then that there are objective moral values is to say that something is good or bad independently of whether any human being believes it to be so. Similarly, to say that we have objective moral duties is to say that certain actions are right or wrong independently of whether any human being believes them to be so. Okay. Let me give you guys some examples. So, to say that the Holocaust was objectively wrong is to say that it was wrong even though the Nazis who carried it out thought it was right. It would still have been wrong even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in either exterminating or brainwashing everyone to think exactly like them. Okay? To give you guys an example from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, for the person who believes that morality is subjective, the statement, it is wrong to ignore a person in distress if you are able to offer aid, just means something like, I find it offensive or I find it distasteful when someone ignores a person in distress. Okay? The moral objectivist will probably agree with Michael Ruse when he says, the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. That is what it means to believe in objective morality. No matter if the whole world agrees or doesn't, there is objective morality. Okay? So, any questions on the distinction between objective and subjective, and then more particularly, objective moral values and moral duties? I know these are interesting distinctions, okay? Let's make another distinction. That is the one between moral ontology versus epistemology. This is the difference between being and knowing, okay? Don't get thrown off by the fancy words, okay? Moral ontology. It deals with the reality of moral values and duties. It asks, what is the ground or foundation of moral facts? Epistemology deals with our knowledge of moral truths. How do we access or come to know moral truths? So I'll go ahead and repeat that again. Moral ontology deals with the question of the reality. So what is the ground or foundation of moral facts? Epistemology is about knowledge. How do we come to know these moral truths? Okay, something can exist and you not know it, right? Those are two different questions, okay? Ontology versus epistemology. So, going back to our two questions at the beginning, can you be good without believing in God? And can you be good without God? We see that the new atheists and many people out there fail to distinguish between moral ontology and epistemology. Our claim here is not, or the question is not, must we believe in God in order to live moral lives? That's not the question. There is no reason to think that atheists and theists, or people who believe in God, may not live moral lives, okay? Likewise, the question is not, can we formulate a system of ethics without reference to God? There are many systems of ethics that reference God that are secular. Kant, okay, utilitarianism, etc., etc. The question is not, can we recognize the existence of objective moral values without reference to God? The Bible actually says that non-believers can. It says this in Romans chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. It says, indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. Little complicated verses, but basically what it's saying, Gentiles who don't have the law of God have access to what is right or wrong, broadly speaking, because God has given them a conscience and the moral law is written in their hearts. So do we need to believe in God, right, for moral values and duties? No. But if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist, okay? So all of the above misunderstandings that I just listed are based on confusing God's existence with belief in God's existence. To repeat myself, the argument is not that belief in God's existence is necessary for the objective reality of moral values and duties, but that God is necessary for the objective reality of moral values and duties. Okay? Any questions at this point? Okay. So, you might be surprised to hear that many atheists agree with this claim. Okay? Many atheists will themselves admit that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. They will say that morality is a corporate illusion or a noble lie that we tell ourselves in order to cooperate. Okay? Dawkins, this is what Dawkins himself says. Look at this quote. If the universe were just electrons and selfish genes, meaningless tragedies are exactly what we should expect, along with equally meaningless good fortune. Such a universe would be neither evil nor good in intention. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. So notice, what is Dawkins saying? According to his own worldview, we have the quote there, good and evil don't exist in any objective sense. But then this raises a problem for people like Dawkins. If good and evil don't objectively exist, on what basis can Dawkins call the God of the Old Testament a moral monster or religion the root of all evil? If his worldview is right, then those kinds of moral judgments are nothing more than expressions of personal taste or distaste, like I like or dislike ice cream. So it would be akin to him saying, I find the God of the Old Testament distasteful. Okay. As C.S. Lewis aptly put it in his book, Mere Christianity, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? So, in the very act of rejecting God on moral grounds, the atheist assumes an objective standard of justice that his worldview doesn't allow him. In short, he must borrow from God in order to argue against God. Problem solved, right? We don't need the rest of the book? No, not so fast, guys. The atheist actually has two moves here, okay? And this is what we will cover next class. Any further questions or comments? Okay. If not, then please bow your heads. We're going to end with a benediction. God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone is immortal and who lives in unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see. To him be honor and might forever. Amen.